Hey there, welcome back to my kitchen. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. In honor of my 2-year anniversary here on YouTube, I am sharing 25 of our favorite recipes from June of 2023 to June of 2024. So that lets you know that every single recipe in this video is delicious, tried and true, and is on our permanent rotation. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that I'm not able to type out every single recipe in the description box. There's just not enough room. So what I did was I just went ahead and linked each recipe's original video, and in that original video, you'll be able to find the recipe in that video's description box. I hope that makes sense. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started, and I will show you these 25 amazing recipes. First up today, we're going to make these chicken Parmesan burgers. These were so good. Into this nice big bowl, I'm adding 1 pound of ground chicken, 1 tablespoon of minced garlic, 1/3 of a cup of grated Parmesan cheese, just like the spaghetti kind, a half cup of Italian style breadcrumbs, 1 teaspoon of parsley, a half teaspoon of basil, just a few shakes of pepper, and then we're just going to get this mixed together. This recipe does make 4 burgers, so I'm just going to go ahead and divide this into 4 equal portions and make them into patties. Now over to my stovetop, I'm just adding some olive oil into a skillet and letting that get nice and hot. And I decided I'm only going to cook 2 of these at a time, and I'm just going to cook them until they are nice and browned on each side and of course cooked all the way through. Once my first 2 were done, I went ahead and cooked the other 2, and then once all 4 of the burgers were cooked through, I added them all back into this skillet. Over top of the burgers, I'm adding 1 jar of spaghetti sauce. Any kind will do. I just like to use the tomato, garlic, and basil one. I'm just adding the lid and I'm gonna let this simmer for about 5 minutes until the sauce is all the way warmed through, and to make sure that my first set of burgers are nice and hot as well. Now I'm just adding 4 slices of mozzarella cheese. Once the cheese has melted, you can go ahead and just add that right on top of a bun. I am using some brioche buns today. And we actually didn't have anything else with these burgers on this night. These were pretty filling, if I'm being honest. But also, we weren't that hungry, so we went ahead and just had the burgers all by themselves. But you could make french fries to go along with these, or a vegetable, totally up to you. But these burgers were super good and definitely hit the spot. Up next, we're making another new recipe today. We are making these Chipotle chicken tacos in the crock pot. You will need to add in 3/4 of a cup of chicken broth, 1/4 a cup of honey, 2 Chipotle peppers in adobo sauce. I've never used these before. This was my first time using them in a recipe and I really liked them. I just chopped them up into nice small pieces with a little bit of the sauce. Then you'll add in 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, 1 tablespoon of lime juice, 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika, 1 teaspoon of cumin, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of oregano, 1 teaspoon of salt, and a half teaspoon of pepper. I am just going to go ahead and give this a good mix together and get all of that combined in my crock pot. Next, I'm adding in these chicken thighs. This is a little bit less than the recipe called for, but it's what I had in my house. So I went ahead and added those in there and broke them apart the best I could and kind of got them mixed in that sauce. This chicken will cook on a low heat for right around 5 hours. Once the chicken is done, it will look like this in your crock pot. I'm going to go ahead and just remove all that chicken onto a plate for just a moment. Into this little bowl, I've added in 1 tablespoon of cornstarch along with just a little bit of water. I'm going to mix this together and then add it into the juices of the crock pot. Give it a little stir and then add the lid and let this kind of sit in here while you are shredding up your chicken. Once the chicken is shredded, go ahead and add that back into the crock pot. Give this another good mix together, and then I let this sit in the crock pot for about 30 minutes. Once the sauce has thickened up a little bit, you can go ahead and eat these. On mine, I had some red onion. I did not make the pickled onions like the recipe called for just because I knew I would be the only one eating them. But I added the red onion, some avocado, sour cream, and feta cheese. I also sprinkled just a little bit of lime juice over the top, and we ate these in some street tortillas, and these were amazing. I will definitely be adding these into my rotation. These were just so great. Both of us loved them. Up next, we're going to make some homemade Cheddar Bay Biscuits, and believe it or not, this recipe is very quick. It only takes about 20 minutes from start to finish. You will need to preheat your oven to 400 degrees. First, into this bowl, I'm adding in 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, and then I'm just going to give this a quick mix together. You will also need 1 stick of unsalted butter, and I did just go ahead and try to cube that up a little bit. Dump that right into the flour mixture, and then I'm going to use my hands to break up the butter into this flour mixture until it's nice and crumbly. Normally I would just use a fork for this, but believe it or not, every single fork I had in this house was in the dishwasher when I was making this recipe, so I just had to use my hand for this. And it should come out looking nice and crummy just like this. Next, I'm adding in 1 cup of medium cheddar cheese. You could also use mild or sharp if you prefer, but medium has just the right flavor for this recipe. Then add 1 cup of buttermilk, and since I already used my hand for this earlier, I just went ahead and kept using my hand and got that all mixed together. Once it has all come together and is looking something like this, you can go ahead and start adding them to your baking sheet. I'm just using this well-loved pizza pan. This pan is amazing. Nothing ever burns on this pan, so I like to use it for everything. I'm going to make these into pretty large biscuits. You can make them a little smaller if you want to. I just took a nice handful of them, very gently rounded the edges out, and then added them to my pan, making sure to have a little bit of space between each one. When I make these, I usually get between 10 and 12 biscuits out of it. I stuck those in the oven to bake for right around 15 minutes. While those are in the oven, we're going to go ahead and make the topping. Into this little bowl, I have half a stick of unsalted butter. I'm adding in a half teaspoon of dried parsley, half a teaspoon of garlic powder, and 1.5 teaspoons of minced garlic. Just go ahead and add that into the microwave for about 30 seconds until it is all the way melted. Here is what the biscuits will look like coming out of the oven. You will notice that the bottoms should be golden but not overly brown. The top should have a couple dark spots and the cheese should be melted, and they should be done at this point. When the biscuits are done cooking, you can go ahead and take that garlic butter mixture and cover those generously all over the tops. If you're going to make anything out of this video, let it be these biscuits because they are phenomenal and I could eat a whole plate of these by myself. Next up, we're going to be making this avocado and basil chicken pasta salad. To begin, I'm chopping up about 1/4 of a red onion, half a cup of cherry tomatoes, and with these I cut them into 2 to 3 pieces just depending on how big they were. Then I have about 5 to 6 leaves of basil here. I'm just going to chop those up nice and small as well. And then I have 1 small avocado that I'm chopping as well. And then you will also need 1 chicken breast. I just went ahead and baked this in the oven on 350 for about 15 minutes. And I seasoned it with just a little bit of salt, pepper, and garlic powder. If you don't want to cook a chicken breast, feel free to use a rotisserie chicken. I went ahead and added that chicken into a nice big bowl, and I also added in about 8 to 10 ounces of cooked rotini pasta. Now you're going to go ahead and add in your basil, tomatoes, red onion, and avocado. Push that to the side for a minute and we're going to go ahead and make the dressing to go on top. You'll need to add in 1/4 cup of white wine vinegar, a little bit over 1/4 of a cup, I'd say 1/4 of a cup, and 2 tablespoons of a high quality olive oil, 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning, half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, and then I added about 1/4 teaspoon of pepper and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And later on, if you taste this and decide it needs a little bit more of one of those seasonings, it's fine, just go ahead and add it in there. I mixed that up and then poured this over the pasta salad, and now I'm just going to give this a good toss, and it's going to go into the refrigerator for at least 30 minutes. I had actually made this pasta salad and ate it all week long for my lunches. It was a really nice, easy, refreshing lunch to have in this warm weather that we're having here. A couple of times this week I actually sprinkled some Parmesan cheese into this, which was also a really nice touch. So if you want to try that, you can do that as well. You could add some red pepper flakes in here if you want it to be a little bit spicy, but overall, really, really refreshing, and I loved that fresh basil in here. Up next, we're going to make some double-decker burger tacos. To begin, I am just taking 1 pound of ground beef and breaking that up in my skillet. To season this ground beef, I'm adding in about 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder, 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/2 teaspoon of minced dried onion, 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and about 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. I did season this before it was fully cooked, that way the seasonings could really cook down in there and the minced onion could get soft. Once that's all done cooking, if you need to drain it, go ahead and do that. I'm also going to chop up a little bit of lettuce, red onion, and tomato. To build these, you will need a tortilla. I'm going to take some of this stadium-style cheddar and add that to the tortilla. Spread that around, and then you're going to also add in 1 hard shell taco in there. Try to get that taco shell as center as possible inside of the tortilla, and then close it up in there. As you can see, I probably could have gone with some street-style tortillas and it would have fit better in here. However, the tortilla being a little bigger than the shell was actually great because it really helped to hold the toppings on. I added a scoop of our meat in there, and then I also added some shredded cheese over top of the meat. And then added all the toppings that I wanted, so I added the tomato, lettuce, red onion, along with some burger sauce, but you could also add pickles, ketchup, mustard, whatever you prefer on your burger, put it on this taco. To go along with this, I just made some french fries because you know french fries and burgers. I just want to say that this meal was so fun. I loved this meal. It was a little hard to pick up with one hand here, but this was a different kind of meal that we don't normally have, but it was still so simple and so delicious, and I think that you could customize these for anybody in the family and everyone will love them. And now we're making this awesome crock-pot recipe, beef and gravy over some mashed potatoes. So to begin, I'm just using my small crock pot because this does not make a ton of food in here. And then I'm adding in some beef stew meat, and this beef stew meat was about 1.25 pounds, so just over a pound. So if you want to make more than that, you will have to double or even possibly triple this recipe. Next, I'm adding in some salt and pepper. I didn't even add a 1/4 teaspoon of these. I just added a couple shakes. You can always add more in the end. Next, I'm adding in a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder and a 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 packet of this au jus gravy mix, and then 1/2 cup of beef broth. I gave that a little mix together, and then I took about 2 tablespoons of butter and just sliced that up and laid them over the top. Then I just added the lid on and let this go on a low heat for 5 to 6 hours until that beef was just super tender. Now, like I said, I am going to have this over some mashed potatoes, but you could also have this over some pasta. But somebody asked me a couple weeks ago how I make my mashed potatoes, so I thought I would just throw this in here. I never measure anything when I make mashed potatoes, so first of all, I'm of course going to peel, cube, and wash my potatoes. Then I just boil them on my stove until they are fork tender. If I'm not making too much like today, I just make them right here in my pot, but if I'm making a big amount, I'll just add them into my big mixer. It's so much easier that way. Into my mashed potatoes, I like to add butter and 1/2 and 1/2. I usually always have 1/2 and 1/2 in my fridge, so that is what I'll use, but milk will work as well. Then I add a spoonful of sour cream, and I use my little potato masher to mash that up. Now, to season my mashed potatoes, I like to use garlic powder, salt, and pepper. Occasionally, I will add in some parsley just for a little bit of color. And again, I do not measure any of these. I just add some in, give it a good mix, taste it, and if it needs something else, I'll add it in. Like today, I needed to add a little bit more butter and a little bit more salt. Mashed potatoes are honestly a very easy side and very affordable. I like to start these about 30 minutes before my beef is done, and then this is what the beef actually looked like when it was finally cooked. This is what my finished plate looked like. I added it on top of the mashed potatoes with a little bit of that sauce. This meat was very tender and the flavor was just so good. And on the side this night, I decided to have some Brussels sprouts. My husband really enjoys this meal, so we fully cleaned out the crock pot. So if you are making this for a family, like I said, you will want to make sure that you double or triple this recipe. And now a recipe that never gets old, we're gonna make this skillet pierogi and sausage meal. To begin, I am just getting some salted water ready. This is where I'm going to cook the pierogies. And then over to my cutting board, I'm chopping up half of a yellow onion, and I'm also going to slice up 1 package of smoked turkey sausage. You don't have to use turkey if you don't want to, that's just the one that we prefer. For the onions, make sure you chop those up pretty small, and then over to the sausage, you'll want to slice those in half long ways and then chop them into small half moon shapes. While we're waiting on the water to boil, I'm going to go ahead and get some olive oil and a little bit of butter, about a tablespoon of each, started in this skillet. Once it's warmed through and melted down, we're going to go ahead and add our sausage and onions in here. Basically, you're going to cook the sausage until it has browned and the onions are nice and tender. Once my water is boiling, I'm going to add in 1 package of pierogies. For this recipe, I am using the 4 cheese medley, and also you're just going to follow the package directions on those and cook them until they're all floating on the top. Now that my sausage and onions are done, I'm actually going to just move those over to another bowl for right now, melting about another tablespoon of butter and olive oil in there. And now we're going to add in our drained pierogies, and basically you're just going to leave these in here long enough so that they can get nice and golden brown on each side. Obviously they're a little crowded in this pan, but I wasn't going to dirty another one, so I'm just going to flip them around until all of them have gotten that nice color on them. Once they've all gotten at least a little bit of color, I'm going to go ahead and add in my sausage and onions, and then we're also going to add in 1 cup of heavy whipping cream. I turned the heat on my skillet down to a low-medium heat. I almost forgot, that's why those bubbles went a little crazy around the edge at first. Once you've got that mixed together pretty well, go ahead and add some seasonings, and you can do this to taste, honestly. I usually add a little bit of garlic powder, salt, and pepper, and a dash of red pepper flakes, but if you don't like spicy things, then that's definitely not necessary. All you need to do is let this sit for about 10 minutes in the skillet on a low-medium heat. The sauce will begin to thicken up, and then after about 10 minutes or so, you can add on a handful of shredded Parmesan cheese. Add the lid to your skillet and let that cheese melt down for just a few minutes, and once it's melted down, it's ready to eat. Here's what my finished plate looked like. This is one of our favorites. I forgot about this meal. It is so good. Very quick and easy to make. You don't need a lot of ingredients, obviously, and I just made some Italian style green beans to go along with it. If you've never had pierogies before, that's what they look like on the inside. Very similar to what ravioli looks like, except these ones are made with potatoes. Next up, we're going to make these jalapeno, onion, and cheese sliders, and let me tell you, these were my favorite of the week. They were amazing. To begin, just preheat your oven to 375 degrees. Now into the skillet here, I'm adding about a tablespoon of avocado oil and a tablespoon of butter. I sliced up 1 whole onion and added that into there once it was nice and hot. I'm just going to sprinkle them with a touch of salt and pepper and let these cook until I'm done with everything else. Hopefully you get to cook them at least about a half an hour. Now into the skillet here in the front, I'm adding in 1 pound of ground beef. Mine was still a little frozen, but that's okay, it'll still cook all the same. I'm also just going to go ahead and season this now with about half a teaspoon of garlic powder, half a teaspoon of onion powder, 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and about 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. Of course, you can change those seasonings or adjust them however you like. Let this ground beef cook up, and then once it's done, if any grease needs to be drained off, go ahead and do that. Mine was a lean ground beef, so I actually did not need to do that. But once the ground beef is done, you will just go ahead and add it straight to your slider buns. Again, I'm only using 8. This recipe does make enough for 12 sliders though, so if you decide to use the entire package, you totally can do that. Just try to make sure that the ground beef is even over top of all the buns. Over top of the ground beef, you will add some jalapenos. You can use fresh if you want to, but I like to use the jarred kind, that way they're not quite as crunchy. Add as much as you like on there, and then over top of that, your onions should be good by now. Go ahead and add those on top next. If someone in your family or your kids do not like jalapenos or onions, it's very easy to keep these off a couple of these sliders and just have basic cheeseburger sliders. So just make sure you keep that in mind. You can change these however you need to. Next, you will just add some cheese. I'm using some American cheese because I think it pairs so good on cheeseburgers, and it pairs really well on here as well. So I went ahead and just took about 4 slices and covered all my sliders with those, added the buns on top, and then these went in the oven to bake for about 10 to 15 minutes until the cheese was melty. Here's what they looked like coming out of my oven. As you can see, they were nice and toasty. American cheese always does melt weird, so it doesn't look fully melted, but it was melted once I broke them up. You could tell here a little bit more. Like I said, these were my favorite of the week. They were just so flavorful. I love that spiciness about them, and the American cheese honestly really made these. On the side, we just had some French fries to go along with it, keeping it nice and easy. Next up, we're gonna go ahead and make this ham and cheese tortellini. To begin with this one, I am just chopping up half of a yellow onion. And just so you know, if you do not like onion, go ahead and just skip the onion for all of these recipes. Then I'm also taking 2 smaller ham steaks and just going ahead and cubing those up. Over to my big pot on the stove, I'm going to add in a little bit of some avocado oil and just let that heat up. Then you'll add in the ham and the onion together and let that cook in this pan. Let the onion get nice and tender and let the ham brown up a bit. Next, add in about 2 teaspoons of garlic and just let that cook for about a minute or so until you can smell the garlic nice and strong. Next, you'll add in 1 19-ounce bag of frozen tortellini. If you don't want to use tortellini, you could also use ravioli for this. You just have to be a little bit more careful with the ravioli when stirring. Then I'm adding in half a cup of heavy cream along with about 1.5 cups of chicken broth. Now give this a really good mix together, making sure to scrape the bottom of the pan to pick up all that wonderful flavor. And you'll just let this go and let that tortellini cook for about 10 minutes. At this point, of course, you're going to see a lot of liquid in the pan. So I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of cornstarch into a small bowl along with a little bit of liquid from the pan. Give that a good mix together, make sure all of the cornstarch has been broken up in there. Add this back into your tortellini and give it a good mix together, and you will notice this will thicken up pretty quickly. Once that sauce has thickened up, go ahead and add in about 1/2 cup of shredded Parmesan cheese and 1 cup of shredded mozzarella cheese. Give this one more mix, let that cheese melt down, and then it's ready to go. Feel free to add some salt and pepper in here if you want to, however, I did not think it needed it at all. That ham adds so much flavor in there. The ham is already salty, so I think it turned out fine without any seasonings. To finish it off, I just added some shredded Parmesan cheese over top of the pasta, and then on the side I made myself some Brussels sprouts. Up next, we are making some popcorn chicken casserole. I went ahead and preheated my oven to 375 degrees. Over to my cutting board, I went ahead and started peeling and cubing about 8 potatoes. We are just going to start off by making some mashed potatoes in today's recipe. So once I got all my potatoes cut up, I went ahead and transferred them into a nice big pot with some water. And I'm just going to boil those on my stove until they are fork tender. After draining my potatoes, I'm going to add in about half a stick of butter, and I like to try to cover it up a little bit so it can melt in that heat. I also like to add some half and half or milk, a scoop of sour cream, and then salt, pepper, garlic powder, and parsley to taste. I never measure the amounts I put in my mashed potatoes. I do it all to my own taste and the consistency that me and my husband both enjoy. So go ahead and make your mashed potatoes any way you want to. About an hour before I started dinner, I went ahead and pulled out this bag of popcorn chicken from my freezer. I let it sit on the countertop and kind of soften up a little bit, so they were partially thawed at this point. Now over into my 9x13 casserole dish, I'm going to go ahead and spray that down with some nonstick spray and then add in those mashed potatoes and spread them out evenly in the bottom. Next, over top of the mashed potatoes, I'm adding in 1 cup of corn. I just used some frozen corn that was thawed out on my countertop as well. And you can feel free to add more corn than this. I just personally don't like an overabundance of corn, so I only did 1 cup for us. Over top of the corn, I'm then going to add some shredded cheddar cheese, about 1 cup to 1.5 cups. And then finally, over top of the cheese, we're going to add that bag of popcorn chicken. I'm just going to go through these and make sure they are all in one single layer over the top, and then this is going into my oven to bake for approximately 25 to 30 minutes until the chicken is done. While that's in the oven, I'm going to go ahead and prepare 1 package of chicken gravy mix. You can also use brown gravy, but I honestly think that the chicken is way better on this. This is what the casserole will look like when it comes out of the oven. Just make sure that your chicken is nice and hot all the way through, and then drizzle that gravy right over the top. Here's what my finished bowl of food looked like. This meal was beyond easy to make, and I'm telling you right now, every single one of my younger siblings would love this meal. It's so easy to make and also very, very filling, so I think everyone in the family can enjoy this one. Next up, this is something I love to meal prep throughout the week to have for lunches. We're going to make this air fryer veggie and chicken sausage recipe. Into this large bowl, I'm chopping up 1/2 of a red onion. This one was pretty large. You're going to want to cut these pieces into bigger bite-sized pieces, along with 1 orange bell pepper, cutting it the same way, 1 red bell pepper, and 1 zucchini. I did slice the zucchini in half and cut it into half moons. Last but not least, you will need a package of chicken sausage. I like to use the Chipotle one. It has some cheese in it. That's what those little white parts are inside of it. And it also has a little bit of spice, which makes this even better. After adding everything into my bowl, I'm going to drizzle it with about 2 tablespoons of olive oil and then get it mixed together. Now we're going to add seasonings. I have 1 tablespoon of ranch seasoning, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, a half teaspoon of salt, and just a few shakes of pepper. I'm going to get that combined and make sure those seasonings are all throughout. And now I'm adding half of this mixture into my air fryer. My air fryer basket isn't very big, so I went ahead and did 2 batches. I'm cooking these on 390 degrees for 10 minutes. When I cook the second batch, I'll only cook it for 8 minutes since the air fryer is already preheated. Here is what my plate looked like. I love making this for lunches. I think I said that earlier. Usually I'll eat this with a little bit of cottage cheese, but this is also really good over top of rice. I will portion this out into 4 different containers, and then it's enough for me to have for 4 days out of the week, and it keeps my lunches pretty healthy and light. And now we're going to make these garlic and cheese breadsticks. If you're anything like me, then you love getting the garlic and cheesy bread type of stuff from pizza places, and that's exactly what this is. So to begin, I am just going to preheat my oven to 400 degrees. Into my mixing bowl, I'm adding in 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 package of dry active yeast, and then 1 teaspoon of sugar. And before we do anything else, I'm just taking a whisk and kind of mixing that together a little bit. Now I'm adding in 3/4 of a cup of warm water. I did temp this water. It was about 107 degrees. You just want to keep that temperature of the water around 105 to 110 degrees. I turned my mixer on a low setting and let this go for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I added in 1 teaspoon of salt and let this continue for another 2 to 3 minutes until it looked like this. It should not be sticky. If it is sticky, then add just a touch more flour and let it go a little bit longer till the flour is mixed in, but you don't want this to be super sticky. I roll that up into a ball. I place it into a greased bowl and let this sit on my counter for 1 hour. Once it has doubled in size, I am just going to add that onto my countertop. It should be light, fluffy, and a little stretchy at this point. And now I'm just going to roll this out. And right here where I paused the video, that's about the size you want for this dough to be when you roll it out. I'm not gonna lie, I was jamming to some Christmas music and kind of forgot what I was doing, and I ended up rolling this out to be like a large pizza. And once I had it rolled out, I was just like, oh well, I'm just gonna go with it. So that's why it's so big right here, but really you don't need it to be quite this large. I added this over to my greased pizza pan, and I just made sure that was all even all the way across. Now in this little bowl, I have half a stick of butter, 1 teaspoon of oregano, and 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. The 1 teaspoon of garlic powder was plenty for me, but you can also add a little bit more if you want this to be extra garlicky, or you can add some minced garlic in here as well. That's also a great option. I microwaved that for 30 seconds until it was melted, and then I added it right on top of that dough. Now I'm taking this Italian style blend cheese and I am adding the entire bag on here. And even if the dough is smaller, you will still add the entire bag. It's supposed to be very cheesy, that's the whole point. So I spread that around very even, and then over the top of the cheese, I'm gonna sprinkle about a tablespoon of dried parsley over that cheese. That way in the oven it can kind of just become one with the cheese. I baked mine for about 12 minutes until it was nice and golden on top, just like this. But if you're using a thicker crust like I stopped and showed you earlier, then you'll probably have to go closer to 15 to 17 minutes. You'll just have to keep an eye on it. This is what it'll look like when it is all done. I absolutely love these. These are perfect to serve aside any other type of pizza that you might make, and some salad or just some spaghetti or any other Italian dish these pair beautifully with. You can dip these in marinara, or you can be like me and dip them in ranch dressing. I think ranch is good on everything, so I love it with these as well. Or you could just make these on their own for a lunch or snack for a movie night, anything you want. Up next, we are doing a Mexican naan bread pizza. I have been craving this for so long, so I finally just did it this week. I went ahead and preheated my oven to start to 375 degrees. I'm also just going to chop up half of a yellow onion, and then into my skillet I have 1 pound of ground beef. I am just adding that pound of ground beef and onion in here together, and I'm going to let them cook until they are all the way done. While that's cooking, into this smaller pan on the back of my stove, I'm adding in 1 can of refried beans. Now to spice these up a little bit, I like to add a couple things in here. So to start, I'm going to let those warm up and then add in about 2 spoonfuls of sour cream, a couple dashes of cumin, and a couple dashes of chili powder, and then I mix it together and let it continue heating up. That's all I do to those. It just gives them a little bit extra flavor and makes them a lot smoother. Once my ground beef was done, I did go ahead and drain off any grease that was in there. I also just added a little bit of water and then about 3 tablespoons of taco seasoning. I got that mixed together, and then I'm just going to leave this sit over here for just a minute until I'm ready to use it. Now onto a baking sheet, I went ahead and added my 2 pieces of naan bread. For the base of this naan bread pizza, we're going to be using that refried bean mixture. There's honestly enough ingredients here where you could get away with making about 3 of these pizzas, but since there was only 2 of us, I only did 2. Over top the refried beans, you'll go ahead and add your ground beef mixture. And finally, you'll add some shredded cheese. I'm just using a Mexican cheese blend. Add as much cheese as you want. In my opinion, I don't think there is a wrong or right amount. Just add as much cheese as you like. Now these are going into the oven to bake for right around 10 minutes until the edges are a little bit crunchy and the cheese has melted through. Onto my cutting board, I'm going to go ahead and chop up a little bit of lettuce and some Roma tomato. Here's what the pizzas will look like coming out of the oven. At this point, you can add any other toppings that you like. So I like to have lettuce and tomato on mine. I also like to add on some salsa and then sour cream. As you can see, my husband's in the front. He is much more picky than I am, so I went ahead and just kept his pretty plain, and he ended up just putting some hot sauce and some sour cream on his. Here is my finished plate in the end. This is just a couple pieces of mine. This is not the whole pizza. As you can see, the crust has hardened up a bit on the edges, which was really nice. It gives you a little bit of something to hold on to. I'm a huge fan of using naan bread to make pizzas like this. They also make naan bread that's a little bit smaller than this. I think they're naan bread minis. You can use those as well to make smaller pizzas, especially if you have little kids. I think that would be really nice for them. Up next, we are making this absolutely amazing sausage and gnocchi casserole. We love this recipe. It's so good and also extremely easy. I started by preheating my oven to 375 degrees, and then I got a pot of water started on the back burner of my stove. Now I'm just chopping up half of a yellow onion, and then over into a skillet on my stovetop, I am going to start 1 pound of ground Italian sausage. I'm also going to add that onion in there and let them cook together. Now that my pot of water in the back is pretty much boiling, my pots of water never fully boil on this stove. I don't know what it is, but it never fully comes to a boil. So it's ready to go now. I'm going to add my potato gnocchi in there and let that cook. It only takes a minute. Once it's all floating to the top, you know it's good to go. I went ahead and drained that off and just set it aside for right now. And also at this point, my sausage is now done cooking, so I'm just removing that into a bowl. Next, you need to add 3/4 of a stick of butter. I had a little mishap and stuck the whole thing in here, but I did end up taking out 1/4 of that stick of butter, so you only need 3/4 of a stick now. Once that has completely melted, you can add in your heavy cream. This is about 1 cup of heavy cream, and at this point I am also going to scrape the bottom and the sides and really deglaze my pan. Definitely make sure you take the time to do this because you're going to pick up a lot of that sausage flavor off the bottom of that pan. Now add in 1/8 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. You only need a little bit of that. I am going to stir this in before I add in my cheese. Slowly, I'm now going to begin adding in about 3/4 of a cup of freshly grated Parmesan cheese. After getting that all mixed in, I did just let this simmer on a low heat for about 5 minutes, just to make sure everything was 100% melted down. Now I'm just moving my gnocchi over here to my main burner, and I'm going to pour that sauce right here into the gnocchi pan. You will also want to add your sausage and onion in here as well and give that a really good mix to combine. Now over to a small baking dish. This one is an 8x8. I went ahead and poured all of my gnocchi and sausage in there and spread it around as evenly as possible. Over the top, I did just add some fresh Parmesan cheese. Honestly, there is no right or wrong amount, just add as much as you want on there. And then I also added a pinch of parsley on there to let that cook down in the cheese in the oven. This baked in my oven for about 15 minutes, and this will really help it to thicken up and also get that cheese on top nice and melty. I did just serve this with some broccoli and they paired wonderfully together. I was dipping the broccoli in the sauce. It was so good that way. Not only did we both really enjoy this recipe, but I think you will enjoy it too, so make sure you give this one a try. Next, I'm sharing something with you. I like to meal prep at the beginning of the week and then have for my lunches throughout the week. My husband, of course, would not eat this because of the broccoli, so it's all for me. I just started by preheating my oven to 400 degrees, and then you're going to need a package of chicken sausage. I really like these ones. They're jalapeno and cheddar. I'm just going to go ahead and slice those up. Next, into a large bowl. Make sure you are using a large bowl, you will need the space. I added my chicken sausage in there, 1 small bag of cheese tortellini, and 1 bag of frozen broccoli. Again, I'll have all the measurements down below for you if you need exact measurements. Over the top of this, I'm adding 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and then for the seasonings, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of ranch seasoning, about a ½ teaspoon to 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of red pepper flakes, but if you don't like heat, you can definitely leave those out, a few shakes of pepper, and just a little bit of salt. Don't go too crazy because you did add the ranch seasoning, which is also very salty. After adding everything in, I'm just going to get this mixed together really well. If you're mixing this and it seems like the seasonings don't want to stick to anything because they are frozen, then go ahead and add another tablespoon or so of olive oil and get it mixed together again. Over to a baking sheet. I am just spraying that down with a little bit of nonstick spray. I am going to dump everything from the bowl onto the baking sheet, spread it out evenly so everything can cook the same, and then this is going into the oven to bake for about 10 minutes. Once that 10 minutes is up, you'll just want to make sure you mix everything up and flip everything around. Then you'll just make sure it's even again and add it back into the oven for an additional 10 minutes. When I make this, I like when everything gets a little crispy, including the tortellini. So after it's been in the oven for 20 minutes, I will turn broil on for about 2 minutes. This gets the broccoli, the tortellini, and the sausage a little bit crispy. So if you don't like that, then go ahead and skip the broil step. But once everything is cooked through and done, you'll just take some fresh Parmesan and grate that over the top. This is such an easy and quick meal to make, and it also has so much flavor in it. I could eat this every single day of my life and not get tired of it. I make it so often. And I do want to mention, if you do not like spicy, like I said, you can skip the red pepper flakes, but also you can replace the chicken sausage with any flavor of chicken or turkey sausage that you want to, or you could even use kielbasa, smoked sausage, whatever you want to. Next, we're making this Margherita Pizza. This is something I always look forward to. It's just so good. I went ahead and preheated my oven to 400 degrees. And then as you can see, I already made a pizza dough. I'm going to link the recipe down below that I used for this pizza dough. I really liked it. But if you don't want to make a homemade pizza dough, you can just get one from the store or get the little packets where you just mix the water to make the dough. Onto the crust, I added about 2 tablespoons of avocado oil and about 1 to 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. I'm going to spread that all over the pizza, and this is going to be our base. Next, you'll just want to add some shredded mozzarella cheese, about 1 cup to 1.5 cups. And then sprinkle it with some shredded Parmesan cheese as well. I used probably about 1/4 to 1/2 cup. Next, I took 1 Roma tomato and sliced it pretty thin. And now I'm just going to add that tomato all over top of the cheese. Next, I'm just lightly sprinkling the top of this with a little bit of garlic, salt, and pepper. I stuck this in my oven for about 15 minutes, and this is what it looked like after the 15 minutes. Now to finish this pizza off, you're going to want to add some fresh basil. If you want to cook the basil, you can add that and then put it into the oven, but I like it to be on top and fresh. I just chopped up about 2 to 3 basil leaves and added that over the top. My mouth is actually watering right now thinking about this pizza. It was so good. I'm a little embarrassed to say that I ate this entire pizza by myself between dinner this night and breakfast the next morning. It was just so good, I could not get enough of it. So if you've never had this kind of pizza before, I definitely recommend you trying it. Up next, this is something that I have never made before, but I did see a picture that I wanted to recreate, and this is what I ended up coming up with. Go ahead and preheat your oven to 400 degrees. So to begin, I'm taking a bag of these small little baby red potatoes, and I'm just going to cut all of these up into smaller pieces and try to get them all about the same size. As I cut them, I'm just removing any bad pieces or any pieces that look a little funny and then adding them over here into this colander. Once they are all cut up, I'm going to wash them really well and then add them into a bowl. Now, if you don't want to dirty any other pans than the pan that you're baking with, you can just add these straight to your baking sheet and mix it all on there, but I decided to use this bowl just to keep things a little bit easier for me to mix up. Into these potatoes, I'm adding about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, a half teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of oregano, a few shakes of pepper, and about a half teaspoon of garlic powder. I got that all mixed together, and then over onto my sheet pan, I'm spraying it down with some nonstick spray so my potatoes don't stick too badly. Add your potatoes right on there and then spread them out all over the sheet pan, that way they can all cook pretty evenly. Into the oven, these went for about 10 minutes, and during that 10 minutes those were in the oven, I went ahead and got everything else ready to go. So using the same bowl that I used for the potatoes, I'm just adding a can of these Italian style green beans. Italian style is our favorite, that's why I'm using those, but you can just use regular if you prefer. Onto these green beans, I am going to season them with a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, a few shakes of pepper, a few shakes of salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon of oregano. And now I'm just going to mix those up and set those to the side until we're ready to use them. Now we're going to make the topping for the chicken, and this stuff is phenomenal. I am adding about 3/4 of a cup of mayonnaise into this bowl, along with a half cup of shredded Parmesan cheese, a 1/4 cup of frozen spinach that had been thawed out, a 1/4 teaspoon to a half teaspoon of garlic powder, just depending on how much garlic you like, and about a 1/4 to a half teaspoon of dill, again depending on how much dill you like, and then a few shakes of salt. Go ahead and get this mixed together and then again set this to the side until we're ready to use it. Now, last thing we're going to do before those potatoes come out of the oven is I have 2 chicken breasts. I am just cutting those in half and then lightly seasoning them with some salt, pepper, and garlic powder. No measurements, I just want to give them a little bit of flavor to build on. So once the potatoes have come out after that first initial 10 minutes, I'm going to move them all around and then push them over to one side of the pan. Now I'm taking my chicken breasts and I'm just going to add those right up against those potatoes. And then taking that spinach mixture, I'm going to spoon that evenly over all 4 of those chicken breasts and spread it over the tops. Now in this little tiny space we have over here, it's the perfect amount of room to add those green beans on. I'm just going to spread those out in that little space over there, and then these are going right into the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes until that chicken is cooked all the way through, and the tops of that creamy spinach mixture should be nice and golden at this point. You also just want to make sure that your potatoes are fork tender. This is what my plate looked like when this was all done. This chicken turned out so good. I love that spinach mixture on the top, and I will be writing all this down to make it again. And over the top of the green beans and potatoes, I did just add a little bit of Parmesan cheese. Another recipe that's been on my list for a while I've really wanted to try is this creamy white lasagna soup. So over to my big pot on my stove, I'm adding about 2 tablespoons of butter and about a tablespoon of olive oil. I'm going to let those heat up together and add in half of a chopped yellow onion. I am going to go ahead and add a little seasoning in here. I'm adding about a half teaspoon of thyme, a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I really wanted to jumpstart the flavor of that thyme in here with the onion and butter, but you can also add more seasonings in the end if you think it needs more salt and pepper or whatever you think it needs. After about 5 minutes, my onion was translucent, so I went ahead and added in a tablespoon of minced garlic. That garlic is just going to cook in here for a minute or so until you really start smelling it nice and strong. Now I'm adding in about 3 to 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour in here. And let it cook in here for a minute or two until it starts to look like it has a slight golden color. Next, I'm adding in 1 chicken breast that I did cube up into bite-sized pieces, along with 6 cups of chicken broth. I'm going to let this come to a nice boil. This is going to cook the chicken. You'll just want to keep an eye on it. I did temp mine in the end after my pasta cooked just to make sure. But once everything is boiling, you will add in 8 ounces of pasta. And this is called lasagna soup. You're supposed to use broken up lasagna noodles. However, I just decided to use bow tie noodles since I already had those in the house. At this point, I'm also going to add in some spinach. I'm adding about a 1/4 cup of frozen spinach. Feel free to use fresh spinach, but I never go through it quick enough, so I like to keep frozen on hand, and I just add in about a 1/4 cup in here. It took about 10 to 15 minutes for those noodles to get completely tender, and you'll notice that the soup will start to thicken up as well. Next, you'll add a 1/4 cup of heavy cream, 4 ounces of room temperature cream cheese, and you'll want to make sure you either cube this up, or I'm just taking my spoon and breaking it into smaller pieces in here. And it is important that it is room temperature. If yours is not, I would microwave it for a moment. If it is cold, it'll be harder to mix in here. It'll kind of break up into smaller pieces and will not melt down like it should. This recipe called for 1 cup of shredded mozzarella cheese. However, I did not have quite 1 cup of mozzarella cheese, so I went ahead and used about 1/2 cup of mozzarella cheese and 1/2 cup of Colby Jack cheese. And I did add that in slowly since it was pre-shredded cheese, that way it would not clump up in my soup. After I got all that mixed in there, you're also going to want to add some freshly grated Parmesan. Same thing with the Parmesan. I did freshly grate this, but I wanted to make sure it didn't clump up in there as well. So I added that slowly in there, and it was about 1/3 of a cup. I took a moment here to make sure everything melted down properly, made sure there was no big clumps of cheese in there, and then I just let it sit for about 10 minutes before serving. This turned out to be such a cozy, creamy soup. I would love to make this again when the weather starts to cool down. It's still pretty toasty here in Arizona right now, but especially if you live in a state that gets cooler here in the fall, this is such a warm and cozy soup. I would definitely recommend trying it out. Now we're going to be making this white macaroni and cheese bake, and let me tell you, this is one of those recipes that my husband gets really excited about when he knows I'm going to be making it. The very first thing I did was preheat my oven to 375 degrees, and then over to a pot of boiling water I added in 10 ounces of pasta. Over to a pot on my stove I am going to melt down 2 tablespoons of butter. Once melted, I'm adding in a 1/2 tablespoon of minced garlic. And then I'm also adding a couple shakes of salt and pepper, but just a little for right now. We're going to add more later. Now I'm just going to let this garlic cook for about 30 seconds to a minute before adding in 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Get that mixed up really well, and you'll just want to let this cook for about a minute or two, kind of let it get a golden color to it. Once nice and thick, I'm slowly going to start adding in my half and half. In my measuring cup, I have 1 1/4 cups of half and half. You'll just mix that together until it's nice and thick. Once that is nice and thick, you'll just want to add in 1/8 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. Now in this bowl, I do have 3 separate cheeses. I have 3 ounces of freshly shredded sharp white cheddar cheese, 6 ounces of freshly shredded Gouda cheese, and then 2 ounces of freshly shredded Parmesan cheese. Slowly, you're going to start adding this in and mixing it up until all of it has completely melted down. Just be sure to save about a half cup of this cheese. Once that's all completely mixed together, you can go ahead and add in your pasta and just get that completely mixed together. Moving over to my cutting board, I do have an 8x8 casserole pan here. I'm going to add in that entire pot of macaroni and cheese. Spread it around as evenly as you can. Now take that remaining cheese that you have and just sprinkle that right over the top. And then you'll want to take some plain breadcrumbs and just sprinkle that over top of everything. I hardly used 1/4 of a cup, you really don't need too much. And then last but not least, I'm adding on just a little bit of dried parsley over the top. That's just going to kind of melt into that top crust. And then bake in the oven for about 15 minutes, and I did turn broil on for about 2 minutes just to darken up that cheese on the top. Here is what my finished plate looked like. This macaroni and cheese is so delicious, definitely one of our favorites to have. And then on the side, I just made some garlic knots and then a broccoli and cauliflower mix. Now we're going to make this chicken and bacon tater tot casserole in the crock pot. I thought this was so good. This was my first time ever making this type of tater tot casserole in a crock pot. I just started by cooking up about half a pack of bacon. And I also took 2 chicken breasts. Mine were a little bit frozen, but honestly, cutting up chicken when it's half frozen is really easy to do. I prefer to cut up chicken when it's a little frozen. It just makes it 10 times easier. I'm just cutting all of this up into little bite-sized pieces. Now over to a very large crock pot. I am just going to spray this down really good with some avocado oil. I do not want these tater tots to stick, so make sure that you spray it down really well. Now I'm adding about 16 ounces of tater tots into the very bottom of the crock pot. Try to lay them as evenly as you can. For this entire recipe, you will need 2 cups of cheese. For right now, we're only adding about 1/3 of that bag in here. Next, you'll add half of your bacon. Just make sure that you do chop that up and reserve the other half for later. The next layer is just going to be all of that chicken that we cubed up. Try to spread that out as evenly as possible. And you will need to season your chicken with about 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and about a 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. Now go ahead and add about another 1/3 of that shredded cheese. Go ahead and add the rest of that bag of tater tots, again just spreading those out as evenly as you can. The rest of that crumbled bacon, and then the rest of that bag of cheese. Over top of everything, you will need to add about 2/3 cup of milk. I actually used half and half, it worked just fine. And then over the top of everything, I'm just adding some dried parsley on there. I turned this onto a high heat and let this cook for about 3 to 4 hours until my chicken was cooked all the way through. Here's what it'll look like when it is all done. The edges got a little crispy, but they definitely were nowhere near burnt. This will scoop out super easily as well. And I did get this little clip of the bottom of the crock pot to show you that it actually did not stick too bad at all, just the very corners of the crock pot. And then when this was all done, I did just plate it with some broccoli and added some sour cream over the top. The sour cream makes it even better. I am definitely not a fan of tater tots, but I really enjoyed this dinner, and I will definitely be making it again. Next, we're going to be making these incredible easy 3-ingredient breadsticks. I did just start by preheating my oven to 350 degrees, and then into this bowl I'm adding in 1.5 cups of self-rising flour and 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk. This is an awesome recipe to make, especially if you bought buttermilk to go in another recipe and now you have a lot of buttermilk left over that you're not sure what to do with. These breadsticks are incredibly easy, so if you do have buttermilk left over after a recipe, try to make spaghetti or something and make these breadsticks to go along with it. I just used a spoon to get this started, and then I went ahead in with my hand and got that mixed together the rest of the way. Of course you can use a mixer, but my mixing bowl was actually dirty, so I just went ahead and used my hand. Once I got that all mixed together, I'm going to divide this into 8 equal sections. Once divided, you can go ahead and just roll each one of those to about 8 inches long. Once you set it on your baking sheet, it will kind of shrink up a little bit. That's fine. Just try to get them about 8 inches to start. I'm using parchment paper to bake these. I think that works better than spraying your pan down with nonstick spray. The bottoms don't get too dark if you use parchment paper, and they don't stick at all. And parchment paper just makes it easier to clean up in the end. Make sure that when you add them onto your baking sheet that you give them all room, that way they can get a little bit bigger in the oven and not stick to each other. Over top of these breadsticks, we are going to be using some garlic parmesan or butter. This stuff you can buy already made at the store just like this. I'm just going to go ahead and brush some of that onto each one of these. And then these are going in the oven to bake for 20 minutes. At the 15-minute mark, I would just check on them to make sure that they are indeed baking fine. Mine did take the full 20 minutes though, and they will begin to get lightly browned on the tops. Here are my breadsticks coming out of the oven. As you can see, they got a little bit bigger, but they are not massive breadsticks. And once they come out of the oven, I'm going to add more of that garlic butter over the tops. Like I said, this is a great way to use up extra buttermilk. I've bought buttermilk before for a recipe and then I had no idea what to do with the rest of it. So this is a great use up what you have kind of recipe in the fridge. The inside of them actually kind of reminds me of Olive Garden breadsticks, but they are super simple. They're honestly the perfect size and they are so soft. And now we're going to be making this beef and noodle recipe. My mom actually made this when we were back home visiting in October, and me and my husband both loved it. So into my crock pot, I am adding 1.5 pounds of beef stew meat. You can also just cook a roast in here and shred that up, but this was a little bit cheaper to do this time. Then I'm adding in 2 10-ounce cans of cream of mushroom soup, or you can use the big 26-ounce can. The difference in the ounces really won't make that big of a difference. 1 can of cream of celery soup. 1 teaspoon of this beef bouillon. 1 box of beef broth. 1 whole stick of butter. And then I'm just going to take my spoon and kind of give this a little bit of a mix. It looks disgusting at this point, I'm not gonna lie, but it will taste really good, so just keep going with it. I'm cooking this on a high heat for about 5 hours, but you can honestly let this go for 7 or 8 hours on a low heat to get that meat super duper tender. I just didn't have enough time this day. Here's what it'll look like after about 5 hours in the crock pot. Everything kind of comes together. You'll just want to give it a little bit of a mix and then add in your noodles. For this, I am using some noodles I picked up when I was back home in Amish country. They are just very wide homemade egg noodles. You can get similar noodles at Walmart, or you can actually use the Reams egg noodles. I really love using the Reams egg noodles, those are my favorite, but this time I really wanted to use these Amish noodles. Let your noodles cook in here for another hour to an hour and a half until they are nice and tender, and then this is ready to eat. Just be sure to salt and pepper to your liking. I honestly did not add a lot of extra seasoning here. It's already pretty salty, I just added a little bit of pepper. Here is what my finished plate looked like. At this point, my meat was so tender, melt in your mouth, absolutely delicious. But overall, this is a major comfort food, and I will definitely make this again. Up next, we're gonna make this spicy, creamy chicken sausage and orzo meal. This was phenomenal. We both love this so much. So to begin, I just have 1 pack of these jalapeno and cheddar cheese chicken sausages, but if you don't want this to be too spicy, you can just use like an Italian chicken sausage or something like that. First thing I'm doing is just throwing those into the air fryer for about 8 minutes and letting the outer skin get crispy. While I'm doing that, I am going to add in about a tablespoon or so of olive oil into my pan. Let that heat up and then add in about a tablespoon of minced garlic. I let that garlic go for about a minute or so until I could smell it nice and strong. And then we're gonna add in 1 cup of dry orzo. With this dry orzo, you're gonna mix it in with the oil and the garlic and just kind of let it brown up for a couple minutes. You just wanna be careful and keep an eye on that garlic to make sure that the garlic does not burn. Once you see some color, go ahead and add in about 2 cups of broth. I'm using chicken broth, but you could also use vegetable broth for this, that would be fine. I gave that a little mix together just to ensure that the garlic was not going to be sticking to the bottom. Next, I'm adding in a 1/4 cup of frozen spinach, 1/3 of a cup of heavy cream, 1 tablespoon of coconut aminos, or you can use soy sauce, 1/2 teaspoon of red pepper flakes. If you don't like red pepper flakes or don't want this to be spicy, then just skip that. A 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, about a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, and about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. If you need to adjust any of those seasonings afterwards, go ahead and do it. It's totally up to you. Once I have all the seasonings in there, I'm just going to give this a really good mix together to get everything combined. I let that simmer on my stove over a medium heat until all of the liquid had been absorbed, which took about 10 minutes or so. Once my chicken sausage was done in the air fryer, I went ahead and just sliced that up and then added it straight into this orzo mixture. You'll also want to add about a 1/2 cup of shredded Parmesan cheese. Give this another good mix together, adjust seasonings if needed, and then it's ready to go. Like I said, this meal was phenomenal, but next time I think I would double it so we would have leftovers, because me and my husband ate all of this on this night and we both loved it, and it would have been nice to have some leftovers for the next day. But like I said, if you're not a big spicy fan, you can go ahead and leave out the red pepper flakes and substitute the spicy chicken sausage for an Italian chicken sausage or something like that. Next up, these chili cheese dogs are awesome for if you're feeding a lot of people at one time. You can make them very quick and easy and only dirty 1 pan. The first thing you need to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees, and then over to my cutting board, I am chopping up 1/2 of a yellow onion, Honestly, you might not even need that much onion, especially if you have people in your house that do not like onions. So just go ahead and chop up as many onions as you think you will need. Now into a 9x13 casserole dish, you will just take an 8-pack of hot dog buns. Line those up in your casserole dish. You should be able to fit 6 straight down and then 2 on the side. Now you will also need an 8-pack of hot dogs. I like to use bun length beef hot dogs. Add a hot dog into each bun, and then next you would just take a can of chili. You can use chili with beans or without, or you can use hot dog sauce, it's up to you. There is no need to warm this chili up or anything, just go ahead and evenly put it on each of the hot dogs. We both love onion in this house, so I'm going to add it onto each one of the hot dogs. But like I said, if you have somebody in your house that does not like onions, you can leave a couple of them uncovered. And now I'm taking some shredded mild cheddar cheese and adding that pretty heavily over top of all of the hot dogs. I stuck these in my oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. And this is what they looked like when they came out of the oven. You just want to make sure that the hot dogs get warmed all the way through and that the cheese is melted across the top. Here's what my finished plate looked like. I had planned on making these for lunch on this day, but we ended up having them for dinner. So on the side, I just made a packet of cheesy Knorr pasta and some broccoli. I don't know why, but these hot dogs seem way better when you make them like this. They're a little bit more messy, however, I just feel like they taste better. I don't know how, they just do. But they're also very filling if you make them like this, and don't be afraid to add even more toppings on top of them. Up next, we are going to make these deviled strawberries. These are a perfect light summer dessert, and they are very easy to make. As you can see, I have cut the center out of these 2 strawberries, and I do have 2 packages of strawberries here, but I am just choosing the 12 largest out of here to make this recipe today. So first, you'll just want to cut off the top of the strawberry and then figure out which side of the strawberry will sit the flattest. Then I go in at a V angle to cut out the center of the strawberry, and you can either save these or eat them or do whatever you want with them. And then I go back through with my knife to just trim out the rest of the white center of the strawberry. In the end, your strawberry should look like this and have room for some filling. I'm going to go ahead and do this to 12 strawberries. However, with the amount of filling I made, you could probably end up making about 24 to 30 of these deviled strawberries. Once your strawberries are prepared, go ahead and just set those aside for right now. Next, into this bowl, I am adding in a half cup of heavy whipping cream. I'm just going to take my hand mixer and we're just going to mix this up until it turns into whipped cream. This will take a few minutes, so just keep mixing until it gets to this texture here. Just set that bowl aside for right now. We're actually going to grab another bowl, and into this bowl, I'm going to add in 3 tablespoons of sour cream. You will also need a half block of softened cream cheese. I actually made a mistake here though and added the entire block in, so that's why I do remove half. Next, add in 1/3 cup of sugar and a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now I'm just going to take my hand mixer again and get this all combined. Make sure that cream cheese is nice and smooth in there. Now you'll just grab that whipped cream that we made and you'll go ahead and add that right into the bowl, but do not use your hand mixer for this part. Just take a spoon or a spatula, whatever you have, and fold this in. Once that is mixed well, you can go ahead and add this into a piping bag, or if you don't have piping bags, you can go ahead and just use a Ziploc bag and just cut the corner off of that. If you do have piping bags and you have some tips to go on the end of those, you can choose whichever design you want. It will add just a little bit of extra flair to your strawberries when they're all done. But go ahead and fill up your piping bag or your Ziploc bag and get all the air out of the tip and then set that aside for just a second. Since the strawberries have been sitting for a moment, we're going to go ahead and take a paper towel and just dab the insides of the strawberries. This will help remove any extra liquid in there, that way the filling doesn't slide right out. Now at this point you should be ready to fill, so go ahead and just start at the bottom and work your way up to the top. It really doesn't take too much of this filling. And like I said, I only made 12 today, but I really had enough filling to make 24 to 30 of these, which I actually ended up doing later that night because me and my husband just devoured these. As you can see, I still have a ton of filling there. And now taking just a little bit of graham cracker, I'm going to crumble that right over the top and give it a nice finishing touch. Here's what they look like when they are all done. I just think these are so simple and so beautiful and perfect for the summertime. If you are going to make these for a cookout or something, I would definitely keep them in the refrigerator as long as possible, and definitely don't put them in direct sunlight, because that filling will melt right out of them and it'll be a huge mess. But if you can have these indoors or just keep them cooled as long as you can, they are so good and just perfect for this time of year. I know today's video was definitely a long one, but if you did somehow make it to the end of this video, I would love for you to leave me a flower down below in the description box. I really hope you enjoyed and got reminded of some really amazing recipes that we've made over the past year. Thank you so much for being here and supporting my little channel. I will see you back here on Wednesday for a new video. Bye!